Welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast, where today's thought leaders discuss how they're using the latest social media strategies and technologies in marketing, sales, customer service, and HR. Get ready to be inspired as our guests contribute to your digital transformation through their stories, knowledge, and insights into what works in today's digitally connected world. And now, here's Bernie Borges, your host of the Social Business Engine podcast.
Hey there, welcome to episode 128. I'm Bernie Borges, your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. Hey, thanks for listening. On this episode, you are going to meet Rebecca Lombardo, Director of Strategic Services at Trax, and Eric Berkowitz, SVP Global Services at Trax. Rebecca and Eric will discuss highlights from Social Business Journal, Volume 8, The 5 Biggest Mistakes of Social Media Monitoring. Later in this episode, I'll let you know how you can download Social Business Journal, Volume 8, brought to you by Trax, the leading social business cloud for building memorable brands and managing customer experience in the social-enabled world. And now, here's my interview with Rebecca Lombardo and Eric Berkowitz from Trax. Rebecca and Eric, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Great to be here, Bernie.
Thank you.
Well, I have been looking forward to this conversation. Rebecca, as you know, we have been planning this for some time now, so here we are. And where I'd like to begin is if you could both provide my listeners a brief introduction and background. Who is Trax? What does Trax do? And of course, what do each of you do at Trax?
Sure. I'll kick us off. Trax is a social enterprise platform that helps enterprises, agencies, organizations of all types really harness the opportunities that social media presents and to extract valuable intelligence and convert that into a healthy, thriving social business. I manage the professional services department at Trax, overseeing customer success and support.
Terrific.
And as Director of Strategic Services, I manage a team that provides services in the way of consulting, auditing, and reporting for Trax customers.
All right, outstanding. Thank you for that. Well, as you both know, in Social Business Journal, Volume 8, which is titled The 5 Biggest Mistakes, that's in social media monitoring, one of the 5 biggest mistakes that we cover is monitoring owned media channels, but missing the full earned media conversation. So what I'd like to do is, first, can you describe what is the difference between earned and owned media, and why is it important to monitor earned media?
Sure. So the difference can be really easily laid out by thinking about what your brand or your organization has some sort of control or ownership over versus the environments of social where there's more organic, consumer-generated conversation naturally occurring. So the easiest way to provide examples would be to think about a brand's Facebook page or their corporate blog or their YouTube channel where there's some level of corporate ownership over that asset. In contrast, earned media would be the rest of the social web where people are conversing outside of those branded walls. And really why we advise clients on giving some deep thought to the importance and value of earned media monitoring is because first and foremost, that's where the majority of the conversation is happening. If you look at just sheer percentages, owned media represents a small fraction of the total conversation. And second, it tends to have an inherent bias. People go to the owned media assets when they're particularly passionate or, they might be brand loyalists or detractors who are looking to catch the attention of their brand. And ultimately, those environments serve as great places for brands to provide support and care and to manage those, one percenters, as I call them, who tend to really look to resolve their issues through owned media interaction. The people in the middle, the 90+% of people out there, will talk about you on earned media. They'll go to the millions of individual blogs and forums and news sites and environments of the Facebooks and Twitters and Instagrams of the world where your brand isn't necessarily listening with an active presence, and they'll talk about you. And this is where we advise our clients to do their best to remove that blind spot, expand their coverage to as much of the earned environment as possible, and get a true and comprehensive representation of consumer perception and sentiment.
Okay. What I'm wondering is how prevalent is that? You say, Eric, that it's 90% or plus 90% people talking about your brand in other places. Does that vary from one industry to the next? You take brands like Nike and Disney, who are, very well known, they're household names, versus perhaps, either smaller brands or lesser known brands. Does it really vary much?
It probably varies according to the social maturity level of the industry. What I mean by that is the more advanced industries, which would include retail and CPG, those industries that dove into social in the early days and have kind of matured along that curve, have spent more time building up a larger owned media presence. They've allocated more resources, both human and financial, to supporting those owned media sites. And in turn, they're getting a lot more activity there. They've created more owned channels. They're able to manage a lot more data, respond to a lot more consumer issues. So I'd say in the more advanced industries, you do see more presence on the owned side, whereas in the industries that lag behind, which are oftentimes regulated industries like healthcare, financial services, pharma, and so on, those that were a bit more tentative to get involved in social, they're still in the early days and they haven't really established too much of an owned media presence. So for them, almost entirely the conversation is happening in earned environments.
That makes sense. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So there's another mistake that we cover in the journal, and that's about collecting social data, but then not turning that data into business intelligence for decision making. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure, I'll take that one as well. What we're referencing here is the tendency to kind of pick off the low-hanging fruit, the vanity metrics, the things that people, I think, falsely assume are a representation or a barometer of social health, such as sentiment or reach is something that people like to look at and put a lot of weight into. And these metrics, while interesting and valuable to some degree, don't really have much connectivity to the larger business objectives and business strategy as a whole. Unless you're making those efforts to tie those metrics into other data sets, whether they be more concrete things like point of sale data, viewership data, or something that really ties directly into the brand's health. So what we aim to achieve with our customers through our reporting and consulting services is to use social metrics as somewhat of a proxy or as a corollary to the larger business goals you have, whether that's acquiring more customers, losing less customers to your competitors, gaining more exposure, understanding consumer perception around, let's say, a product you've launched or changed. Ultimately, sentiment and reach and other social metrics that have become very popular are a good piece of the puzzle. But to look at the comprehensive picture, it's usually going to take a bit more of a deep dive into the end result. So the more we can tie social to third-party data sets, again, I think the best example is point of sale data. There's no kind of more prominent goal that our customers have other than selling their product. The more we can tie those things together, I think the deeper the output becomes. And that's what we mean by avoiding shallow reporting, such as how many fans you have on your Facebook page.
Okay. And so does that imply, is the opposite of shallow reporting a very robust report that's also, 100 pages long with detail and data? I mean, what does that look like?
We don't really look at the size of the report, the number of pages or slides as an indicator of whether a report is shallow or has gone really deep. We certainly value, I think, quality over quantity. But really, when we're talking about a shallow report, we're focused more on the degree to which your metrics are true barometers of your brand's objectives and strategy, and also the degree to which you're looking at them as isolated metrics in a vacuum versus more part of a mosaic of kind of the way your business is going. So, another example is, when customers of ours are using our platform to develop an influencer marketing program. I think the easy assumption to make or the easy thing to do is to try to identify and target those people who have a high reach, meaning the number of fans and followers they might have on their various social profiles. But to us, we think of influence as more of a multidimensional concept. Influence could be the level of impact you have on a category of conversations. It could be the quality of the conversation you're starting. It could be the way you impact your overall ecosystem. So when you look at things from more angles and try to stitch together the various ways that social can impact your business, what you'll oftentimes learn is that the easy or the obvious things that people look at because they tend to be trendy metrics aren't always the deepest or the most impactful for what your brand's trying to accomplish.
Okay, that's helpful, Eric. Thank you. All right, before we get to my next question, I want to pause briefly to let everyone know how they can gain access to the Social Business Journal Volume 8, the 5 biggest mistakes in social media monitoring. In Social Business Journal Volume 8, published in cooperation with Trax, we look at the 5 biggest mistakes in social media monitoring. You'll discover how to avoid these mistakes so you can improve your social media monitoring by digging deeper into conversations, analysis, and trends so that you can realize the revenue-generating power of the social web. Additionally, you'll gain insights from over a dozen industry influencers who weigh in with their expert thoughts. Get your digital copy of Social Business Journal Volume 8 at socialbusinessengine.com/Trax, spelled TRACX, or just follow the link in the show notes for this episode. Okay, so we've covered some of the 5 biggest mistakes that are in the journal. Let's talk a little bit about some of the examples that you're seeing in the industry. I'm sure that Trax, being a leading provider of this technology, that you come across brands that are really doing it right and really organizations that are taking action through social data. So can you give a couple of examples of what you're seeing brands? And, you don't have to mention company names if you don't want to, but let's talk about some real world action.
Sure, I'll take that one. So one example that we've seen that was pretty exciting had to do with CPG industry, where they had a product line that they were looking to kind of double down on their investment over the next 10 to 20 years. And before they moved forward on that, they wanted to do some due diligence, and part of that included social media research. So what they were able to do was focus on the earned media, like we were talking about before, really looking at the topic that they were interested in, seeing what people were saying. They were able to identify the specific networks where really robust conversations were taking place, and they really focused and honed in on some unique conversations, some developing trends, and then kind of went back and peeled back the onion there and saw what was lying underneath those conversations and what were some of the interests driving it. So it had to do with the food industry. So they wanted to know, what were people saying about this particular ingredient? How did they feel about it? Why did they feel that way? Who was saying that? So what they were able to do was isolate 3 different conversations that were taking place, and then kind of find a nexus point among those conversations where one ingredient was in particular prevalent among all of the people discussing allergies, health, weight loss, and several other things. So by focusing in and identifying that kind of nexus point, they were able to unveil an ingredient that is now going to be a point of focus going forward, which is new to their product lineup. So that's just kind of, one example of, really diving into the data and seeing what kind of rich product information it can reveal. There was another one where there was a messaging concern going out during a campaign, and so they were able to notice a trend. And this is kind of something to do with the reporting that we were talking about earlier, where getting away from shallow reporting, where you might see a snapshot of something like sentiment into like 3 different percents of like positive, negative, what have you. If you turn that into a trend line, what you're doing is you're taking a piece of data that appears to be stagnant and without context, and you're giving it motion. And you're giving the people who are going to see that report real insight into what's going on there. So we had a retail client who saw the trend line for sentiment going in a direction they didn't want it to go into after they revealed a clothing product. So they were able to intervene. They were able to save product distribution from going to a geolocation that they were tracking where the product was not being well received, and change the shipment in a different location based, again, on social data to where the product was being well received. And in fact, it was being so well received that they were running out of supply.
Wow.
So to give you some kind of real-time business intelligence examples, there was another one that we spoke with earlier with a software company. They were getting ready to launch a very niche piece of software, completely kind of new company launching a product that was also kind of new to the tech and software industry. So again, they used social intelligence to find influencers that would be the right type and everything to establish relationships with before the launch of the product. So they actually integrated the development of influencer relationships into the timeline of the release of the product.
Fascinating. So in these examples, and I'm sure there's other examples, have you ever discovered an organization that has not only either changed strategy or acted on the data based on the intelligence, but even maybe changed their budget approach to how they approach social, whether it's allocating budget in a different way, including maybe even headcount, like other business decisions that they make as a result of all this social intelligence?
Yes, yes to both, actually. A good example, a very concrete example of a pretty major business shift that occurred off social data occurred with a client of ours in the insurance industry. They had an inkling of an idea that the market that they operate in had plenty of competition for traditional insurance like house insurance and car insurance and life insurance and things like that. But there wasn't a product for bike insurance. And this is a part of the world where biking is pretty commonplace. And they did a little research in our product to see whether there was legitimate demand or, I guess, dissatisfaction with the lack of availability for a bike insurance product, and took a bit of a leap of faith off some initial outputs and decided to launch a product purely based on this social insight, and one that's done very well, one that made them kind of the first entrant and to this day a market leader in that space. So I don't think you can get any more kind of game changing than that in terms of being able to enter a new market and show success there. To your second question about maybe a reallocation or an optimization of resources, we see it happen all the time. We see that companies will dive into social with the expectation that it's really a channel for them to support existing customers, deal with complaints and issues, but then over time realize that there's just as much utility using social as a research environment, or as a way for R&D to test new product ideas or to crowdsource information for new product ideation. And we see the reverse too. We see customers who kind of go into social with the listening and monitoring approach, but then realize there's a lot more opportunity through customer engagement. So in almost all cases, your expectations shift over time. Social is so dynamic and so fast evolving, and your customers can be so fickle in what they want and what they expect. We see companies reallocate, headcount, financial investments across social. I guess the takeaway is that you need to be prepared to change, to shift strategy, to expand your strategy very quickly, because unlike other channels, whether it's print or radio or TV, broadcast, whatever it may be, there's much less predictability. It's much more real time, and it's much more viral. So you have, less time to plan and need to react quicker. And that's what our customers are doing, and that's what we try to help them do from a kind of consultative and service-oriented approach.
Okay, terrific. So my next and last question before I go to my summary of our conversation is I'll ask you to pull out your crystal balls and just give me some insight into what you're seeing on the near horizon. In this industry, as you know, you can't really look too far out because things change so fast. But maybe you can just share with me and my listeners, what you see happening over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months in this area of strategic social media monitoring across these levels that we've discussed here today. And of course, this is discussed in further detail in Social Business Journal Volume 8. But I'd love to get some insight into what you see in the near horizon.
Sure. I'll start us off. I think one of the most fundamental shifts that's been happening for the past couple of years and seems to accelerate every day is the shift in consumer preference for using social and sharing through social via kind of text-based commentary towards a pretty noticeable preference for rich media, whether it be through sharing of links or images or videos. If you look at the kinds of networks which are growing most rapidly, from Instagram to Snapchat to Vine to others of that ilk, you see a compression of text and an expansion of things like video and images. And in turn, as technology providers and social media practitioners, we need to adapt and able to enable our insights and analysis and support to encompass this shift. What that means is investing in new kinds of technologies, as we are doing, to harness things like consumer perception through a picture or through a video, where once we could really only do that through text analysis. And we're making investments both through product development, business partnerships, and just general kind of knowledge and expertise in aligning with this change from text to rich media. And I think that's just going to continue to accelerate. So we're keeping a close eye on that.
And to that point, Eric, about just the whole trend of moving towards that rich media, maybe you know the stat. I don't remember the stat off the top of my head, but it's a pretty remarkable stat. Something like north of 50% of a typical Facebook feed in the next 12 months will be video-based.
Yeah, and that's likewise, we're hearing the same kinds of numbers for geospatial tagging and any kind of geo metadata that's being created. 5 years ago, it was very rare to be able to pinpoint the location of a social conversation. But I think we're approaching that 50% mark of social content that has, typically a precise geo coordinate associated with it. And that happens through the pervasive use of, mobile applications for social networks where people are, geotagging where they are, not only to inform, their friends and family of where they are when they're posting content, but I think also because they know it helps brands better support and serve them. They know brands are listening, our clients are listening. And if you know where somebody is when they're complaining about a product they're using of yours, you are more likely to be able to provide them with, excellent care that they need to improve that situation. So likewise, geospatial intelligence is really growing.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. Rebecca, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that that because of what Eric said about the rapid increases that we're seeing in adaptation, that brands are getting a lot better at using social to communicate, so much so that they're going to feel a lot less like you're communicating with a brand. It's going to feel a lot more human. The style, the content, the interaction types. There's a big investment being made, in mapping out the customer journey. And so I think they're going to also get more sophisticated when it comes to supporting their customers for what that journey looks like, point of purchase and the buying experience. Even in the B2B space, we're seeing really big changes happening there with the way that brands are interacting with their clients and customers. I think that you might not even recognize some of the content here in a year or two that's coming even from the B2B space.
Yep. I couldn't agree more with that. All right, fantastic. So what I'd like to do now is I've been taking some notes here, and I'd like to review our conversation. And then I will ask you to either clarify any points or maybe plug any holes for my summary. And then we'll move toward the wrap up of the podcast. We began our conversation with a brief introduction to Trax. You provide a social enterprise platform that helps organizations really harness the opportunities of social by converting the social data into intelligence and much, much more. We talked about the difference between owned media and earned media, and how owned media is things like corporate blogs and the content on Facebook pages, but it's a small fraction of the total conversation. It's inherently biased, either brand loyalists or the opposite, detractors. But on the earned side, that's really the vast majority of the content. That's where people are talking about you, and brands may not be listening there with an active presence. So that's an obvious place where brands really need to spend a lot of time and attention. We talked about shallow reporting. What is shallow reporting, and how it's really the absence of data that can provide business intelligence, and how oftentimes brands pick the low-hanging fruit from metrics, and metrics like sentiment or reach. But unless it's tied to business outcomes, it really doesn't provide the type of reporting that businesses need. And so you really want to use social data as a proxy to win more customers, lose fewer customers, do product launches, and much, much more. And really just tying social data into third-party data sets like sales, for example. Everybody wants to increase sales, of course. I love the comment about how, degree to which data is isolated or part of a mosaic. I love that metaphor of the mosaic to really tell a story of what's happening in the business, including things like developing an influencer program to identify and target people based on their true influence, their impact, not just their followers. Then we talked about some examples of companies that are doing social data intelligence really well. I don't think I'm going to talk about all of them in the same level of detail, but an example in the fruit industry and how they were looking to double down on a product investment, and they did some due diligence, and they looked at certain topics and found some sentiments across 3 conversations, and then found one ingredient that was a real key point of focus for them. Another one was an apparel company. They determined some sentiment that was a trend line that was negative, so they were able to intervene quickly and then redirect their product launch strategy or product sales strategy. You also talked about a software industry company. They're using social intelligence to find influencers, and they integrate influencers into their product strategy and product launch. Also talked about an insurance industry. That was just a really fun example where they found where the competition wasn't, and they identified an opportunity for bike insurance. They also determined the potential demand for that bike insurance, and they launched an insurance product in bike insurance. And you said they're having success with that. That's a really cool example. And then you just talked in general about how companies are looking to go beyond just supporting existing customers, but with social, but looking to use things like R&D for product ideation, product extension, of course, customer engagement, and really the need to be prepared to change and react quicker based on social data. And the last part of our conversation was, what you see coming in the near horizon in the area of social media, social data, social intelligence. And we talked about the shift in consumer focus from text toward rich media, images, videos, and social networking sites like Instagram, Snapchat getting very, very popular, and that it really can provide we need to adapt insight and analysis around that rich media. And you talked about how Trax is investing in new kinds of technology through videos and pictures so you can, in fact, provide the rich insights associated with that rich media. Also talked about the growing popularity and availability of geospatial intelligence and how that's gaining momentum just through the pervasive use of mobile, and how brands can learn from this data and also understand the customer journey better. So that's kind of my recap. I'm sure I didn't touch on everything, but it's just a recap. So if you want to elaborate on any specific point or maybe even fill in a hole.
So there's just one more thing that I want to add that's actually kind of fun. Sometimes Eric refers to earned media as in the wild. And I think that's a great reference to that kind of stuff. I think I'm going to try and steal it actually, because you really want to see what, you want to study habits and transactions in their natural environment, not in a controlled environment. So I just wanted to throw that in there as a new fun phrase.
I think it's going to make its way into a tweet associated with this podcast. So thank you for sharing that, Rebecca. I agree. That's fun. All right. Well, before I segue to my outro, where I can point people to where they can download Social Business Journal Volume 8, where would you like to send people to learn more about you and all the great stuff that you're doing at Trax?
So everyone's welcome to follow us on Twitter at TRACX. There's also a lot more information and good content on tracx.com.
Fantastic. Well, Rebecca and Eric, thank you so much for joining me here today on this podcast to discuss Volume 8, Social Business Volume 8, the 5 biggest mistakes in social media monitoring. And I just really appreciate all the conversation and the insights you've provided here today.
Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Bernie. That was great.
All right, fantastic. Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation today with Rebecca Lombardo, Director of Strategic Services, and Eric Berkowitz, SVP Global Services at Trax. I want to invite you to download Social Business Journal Volume 8, the 5 biggest mistakes of social media monitoring. You can read more and get insights on this topic from more than a dozen influencers who also weigh in with their wisdom. So get your copy at socialbusinessengine.com/Trax, and that's spelled TRACX. Of course, you'll also find this link on the show notes page for this episode at our website at socialbusinessengine.com. Hey, before I close out this episode, I want to invite you to become a member of our Social Business Engine community. Membership is free and it provides access to premium content that we only make available to members, such as educational webcasts and more. Our community is made up of thousands of business professionals whose common interest is using social media strategy, social technology, and social culture to create better business results and to improve their careers. It's easy to become a member, and remember, it's free. Just visit us at socialbusinessengine.com. Well, that's going to do it for episode 128. I want to thank my guests once again, Rebecca Lombardo, Director of Strategic Services, and Eric Berkowitz, SVP Global Services at Trax. This is Bernie Borges, wishing you continued success on your social business journey.
Thank you for listening to the Social Business Engine podcast. Be sure to tune in again next week to reconnect with Bernie Borges for more insights, inspiration, and practical advice on social business. Visit socialbusinessengine.com to catch even more content on social strategy that will rock your business and your career.